of the International Climate Science Coalition and the International Climate Science Coalition Canada. And the number to call if you want to speak to Tom or Nick or me, but, mostly Tom. We know where we are in the pecking order. That would be toll-free anywhere in North America, 855-346-1020. And, of course, if you want to join in our live chat, if you're listening online, just click on the chat bubble and follow the instructions. You may have to log in, you may have to register, all that stuff. And that's just to make sure you're not a
Martian.
A lurking liberal.
Or a Martian.
That's not true. We welcome our liberal listeners.
We welcome our Martians, too.
We welcome our Martians. Life on Mars?
I think we'll find fossilized remains, but nothing real now.
Okay,
that's my guess.
Nothing alive now, you mean?
Nothing alive now,
okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Oh, by the way, I just during the break, I remembered the other modification we had to make to the engine was new spray nozzles, because as Nick pointed out, you got to atomize the fuel to have it burn, and if it's highly viscous, the old nozzles don't work. So we had to have nozzles, new main fuel control unit, and higher energy ignition system put in. Again, that cost a fortune. But that's what was necessary to make the F5 light throughout the envelope with JP5 and JP8.
There you go, ladies and gentlemen. Your tax dollars hard at work. And speaking of your tax dollars hard at work, how many people were in the Canadian contingent to the COP26 conference that just concluded recently in Glasgow? Does anybody know? I don't know. I'm just asking. I'm throwing it out there. If anyone out there listening to the show knows the answer to that question or wants to look it up, please let us know, because we want to know exactly what our national contribution was to saving the planet by sending a delegation to Glasgow in Scotland.
I'll bet it was 100, a good 100 easily. It's interesting. I went to the Copenhagen Climate Conference, which until Glasgow was the biggest conference in the history of the world for any purpose, even for World War II conferences. They had 30,000 people show up in Copenhagen. I think it was more this time, 35,000 or something. And it was funny because the Al Gore effect hit hard, really hard. Copenhagen had one of the coldest early Decembers that it has ever had. And the Bella Center in Copenhagen, they actually did not think 30,000 registrants were really going to come. And so there was not a sufficient capacity. And we had these Africans who paid a king's ransom to come to Copenhagen, who were standing in line for 8, 9, 10 hours in the cold, freezing, and then not even getting in. And so, it's interesting. I got in because I got there a bit early, but the fact is, I think a lot of the protesters on the street were delegates that couldn't get in.
You're talking about Copenhagen.
Copenhagen,
yeah. Protest.
Yeah, now I understand that the Glasgow meeting had a higher number. Something like 35,000 people. So, here we are being lectured at by high-level bureaucrats, and thousands, tens of thousands of them are flying in this case, 35,000 or something, using all the jet fuel they can, when they could be doing it by video conference. Like it's do what I say, not what I do.
Amen to that. And there's plenty of that going around.
Yeah.
So as an aside, I heard that okay, somebody. I know I'll have to look at this one. Okay, where was I? I heard that there was so many people getting into Glasgow for the conference, flying into Glasgow, that they had to suspend all COVID inspection measures. For people that were flying in. So it was one of those things. Okay, when you're trying to save the world, killing it by COVID infection is okay, as long as the climate doesn't change.
Yeah, that's right. Suddenly, all this great emergency that they had to stop was all suspended because they wanted to get all these people in.
So how many? So what was the in the end? What was the outcome? Because I to be honest with you, I snoozed through the whole thing, right? So I caught a glimpse of headlines, and my understanding is that they came to some sort of an agreement, but the agreement was a failure. I mean,
how do you come to an agreement that fails?
Isn't
that the whole point of an agreement?
They agreed to fail. I mean, really, that's really what it comes down to. So, what Tom, can you tell us a little bit about what were their ambitions, and how far short of their ambitions did they agree to fall to?
Well, to me, the most significant thing they had is their methane pledge. They were going to reduce methane to, I think it was 30%. I'm just looking it up here. 30% below... I'll just find it here in a second. Here we go. Canada officially joined the Global Methane Pledge, which aims to reduce methane emissions by at least 30% below 2020 levels by 2030. Trudeau also repeated another election promise to reduce methane emissions in the oil and gas sector by 75%. And here's what Trudeau said, which is so crazy. He says, as the first country to make this commitment, we're calling on other energy producers to join us in doing what's needed to tackle methane emissions now. Now, there's a couple of things. First of all, Russia is simply not going to do it. Okay, they're a huge methane emitter with their natural gas. And you got to realize that the primary sources of methane emissions from humans are three things: energy, livestock, and rice growing, and they're all roughly equal. Now, in the United States, the European Union, Canada, there's a huge amount of methane emissions coming from the natural gas and oil sector, while rice is very small and, livestock is just sizable. But in many developing countries, rice and livestock are the primary methane emissions. So it doesn't matter how small your economy is or what your sources of emissions are, your target is still a 30% cut. So for countries who are feeding their population with rice, they have to have a massive reduction in methane emission. In fact, one of the things this methane pledge would lead to, because every country, independent of your methane sources, has to reduce it by 30% by 2030, will be mass starvation. I mean, that is one of the natural outcomes of reducing all that rice and your rice emissions. So that is probably the most significant thing that came out of the conference as far as I know. Trudeau also, of course, doubled his commitment to help low and middle income nations, $5.3 billion. You sort of say, okay, so we're borrowing money because we're broke to give to developing countries. Aha. Well, that doesn't sound too bright to me. The other thing, of course, is they agreed to no longer to no longer fund the development of coal stations in other countries. And of course, China just said no. They just said, forget that. So they wouldn't sign it. Canada did, though. Okay, so China's building coal stations all over the world.
Wait a minute.
And Canada's going to stop doing it. And in fact, it's interesting, Canada's also giving money to help countries get away from coal. Several billion.
Wait, hold it, Tom, just a second.
Yeah.
Isn't Canada one of the major suppliers of coal to China? Don't we mine that in BC and send it by ship over to China?
Geez, I don't know.
Am I wrong?
We send it to a lot of the world. But Trudeau is actually putting $1 billion into a fund dedicated to helping countries transition away from coal. So China's going to spend trillions having coal stations all over the world, and they are by far the biggest builder of coal stations, especially in Africa, while Canada's going to waste $1 billion of taxpayer money trying to undo it. It was just brilliant. And, of course, China just said, we're not going to sign that, so they never did.
By the way, just to interrupt, over 300 delegates came from Canada. Over 300. And I just noticed that Marin in the chat room pointed out that included Catherine McKenna, as if we should be surprised about that.
Wait a minute.
Clearly, no, I know
Catherine
what you're going to say,
McKenna?
Nick. She wasn't even the minister anymore, right?
That's what I'm just about to say.
I knew that's what you were going to say, Nick. But I was going to preempt you, but you were just too fast. I just want to point out to you that this was long.
You know what this
planned to
reminds
be.
me of?
This was part of her
This
farewell
reminds me-
tour.
Yeah, well, you know who
that's
else
right.
took a farewell tour? Does the name Sven Robinson ring a bell?
Oh,
Yeah,
did
what
he go
about
too?
Sven?
Well, he stole that ring out of the auction house
You see,
in BC.
Old
Okay.
That's just history. Okay, get
Yes,
over
it is. But it's the reason
You're just
it
upset that
matters
he didn't.
is
You're just
because-
upset. You're just upset that you would have had to go to jail and he didn't.
Yeah.
Well, there's that. But he went on a junket to Scotland to learn about how democracy works 10 days before he stepped down as a member of parliament.
Jeez.
Like, we showed you how democracy works. You got fired.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, my God.
Here's another
This is the
one of
same-
the. Well, yeah. Here's another one of the outcomes. Canada, believe it or not, is we're such suckers. Okay, we're being just creamed by the world in so many ways. And here's another. Canada is the first major oil-producing country moving to cap and reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the oil and gas sector to net zero by 2050. And it's funny because I'll just read a quote here. In a letter sent from Ministers Guilbeault, our previous Greenpeace guy, who's now Minister of Environment and Climate Change, and Wilkinson in Energy and Resources, the government is seeking the advice of the Net Zero Advisory Body on the best way to move forward on this approach after he's made the commitment. Just like we were saying, you can be sure Russia and China and the others are thrilled that Canada is going to really cripple its own industry. They're going to fill the space, not going to make any change in emissions. In fact, it'll probably be a lot worse because they don't give a hoot about greenhouse gases or pollution for that
These
matter.
guys just
Now here-
unbelievable.
And here's another one. On Monday, this is the Monday of the conference, Trudeau stated a commitment towards achieving net zero emissions within Canada's electricity grid by 2035. So within 13 and a half years, we're going to turn off any source of electricity that is not powered by wind and solar and I suppose a bit of hydro. And, that's just simply stupid. You just simply can't do that. You might remember, Jeff or Nick and Joseph, that a professor by the name of Vaclav Smil out of the University of Manitoba, he wrote a book about energy transitions, and it takes many decades to transition an energy system to entirely new energy sources. And that is when it is financially and from a practical point of view advantageous to do that. In this case, it's not advantageous to do it, and they're going to do it in 14 years. Aha. Okay. So you're going to lead to massive blackouts at minus 30 because there's no wind and it's dark. Like, this is really a disaster if they ever try to do this.
Oh, my God. Well, you know what's scary is these people are about smart enough to try it.
Yeah.
And then go, oh, look, climate change, and expect people to believe it. And the sad part is there's going to be a lot of them that do. They won't ever say, oh, well, obviously it's bad government policy that's gotten us into this mess, and we need to get rid of the bums that got us into this fix in the first place. Nobody's going to say that. They're going to go, oh, the government was right. Look how terrible things are. And all the common sense in the world is going to go down the drain. And you and I, people like you and I, are just going to sit here and shake our heads, not just because it's cold and we're shivering, but at the absolute stupidity of so many people, or lack of proper education might be a better way to put it. Let's give them a little bit of credit.
As somebody who spent some time doing strategic political communications, let me tell you, okay, if I was handling the file, how I would handle it. As we get closer, as we get closer to say 2035, and we look around and we realize that the sky isn't falling in because climate change, however real it may be, is creating only very modest changes, and the impact is very modest, almost negligible. So what I would do is I would basically look around and go, hey, we don't have to fulfill any of these promises anymore because look at the great results from all of the work we've done already.
Yeah.
In other words, just declare victory and go home and leave the rest of us alone. And
I can support that.
Yeah, I think I could support it too.
Well, I think India's got the right approach. I mean, they're saying that they're going to hit net zero by 2070, half a century. And in the meantime, they're telling all their coal companies, ramp up production, because, of course, they need the fuel. And, there's a joke that went